Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I've always thought that public service is a noble profession, one concerned with the public good. But clearly nowadays, there are some who don't share that sentiment. One who I think does, however, is Bill de Blasio. He's the city's public advocate and my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
What's happening in this world? I mean, why are people so disenchanted with things they should be very interested in?
Well, it's a time of great upheaval and of tremendous economic stress, and I think that's disorienting to people. You know, it's interesting when you talk to average New Yorkers. I actually find pretty much across the board very constructive dialogue. Folks who have real ideas about what needs to be better and why and how. I am often struck by how many people offer a solution at the same time as they're raising their complaint. But I think at the same time, as there's more and more stress on families, as there's fears about just the basics, the cost of living and whether a job is stable or where the next job is coming from, and with a backdrop of questions about America's strength in the world and everything you're seeing around the world, I think that kind of insecurity eats at people and brings out anger and frustration. And by the way, it's our responsibility as leaders to start answering that. It's not an illogical phenomenon when you think about it, because people are going through a certain amount of pain.
Yeah, but it sort of started before, didn't it? I mean, about the aspirations of really going into public service for the sake of really the common good, the community, a sense of community, a sense that you have a responsibility as a citizen even to do that.
Well, it's an interesting historical arc, because I think it's safe to say before Vietnam and Watergate, probably too much deference was paid to public servants. Meaning a lot was happening behind the scenes that wasn't particularly seemly, and we didn't ask the tough questions. So there's a little bit of hero worship, very simplistic portrayals of people. And then the world turned on its head, and in a sense we got too much information. We saw too much of the seamy underbelly.
The television and everything.
I don't know if we've ever quite recovered from that. I came of age during the Watergate hearings. That summer really was my awakening. And I'm not sure we've ever made sense of things since on one level, because you can have moments of tremendous inspiration. Obviously Barack Obama in 2008, you couldn't think of a more powerful example of something that did unify people, gave them hope, gave them a reason to be involved. I was at the inauguration in Washington, January 2009, one of the most beautiful moments I've ever experienced. So the possibility's there. But I think it's harder than it was a few decades ago.
It's interesting, because I, of course, started way before.
Right.
And another thing about Obama is that it made you very proud, I
Yes.
think, that we elected him. But when you went to school, were you old enough that when you were in school that you took a course called civics?
We had something like it. And
Was that in New York?
I actually was born in New York City, but grew up in Massachusetts. I went to public high school in Cambridge, Mass. And we had something like it. And I think that this is one of the other problems, that we don't teach people a realistic yet, hopeful view of civic engagement. Right. So most people I talk to across the spectrum do not understand the workings of government. They don't understand what the various elected officials do. They care deeply about the issues, but they have trouble connecting life as it's lived to the electoral process, to the process of government. So there's a huge information gap. It's something my office is trying to do something about. That's why we're so focused on community organizing, because that's really about explaining how things work to people and giving them a pathway to be engaged and to get things done for their community. When I came into office, it was before all the Tea Party movement had really taken hold so deeply, and the fight over health care had gotten so troubling and one thing and another. I think I came into office just after the Obama upsurge was cresting. And I hope we can reach back to that, because I think that there is this deep will to be involved, but it takes a roadmap, and it takes trial and error. But I do retain hope, because I think people do want to work toward constructive solutions and do understand, and the Obama election helped to show them that they do have that power in their hands. They can really change the world, but it takes a lot of work to keep showing people the path.
Just briefly, what made you get into public service or politics and government?
I do think that Watergate summer was part of it, because, it was interesting. maybe a little film noir in the sense that you had really troubling things being laid out, but you also had a lot of heroes.
Yeah.
You know, to take the literary analogy again, maybe they're existentialist heroes. You had a lot of folks. I mean, Peter Rodino is a great example. Peter Rodino, who to all, you know, to the naked eye appeared to be just another machine politician.
Absolutely.
Turned out to be this extraordinary hero of
Wonderful.
democracy. And there are a lot of examples like that.
Yeah.
Folks who put their own lives and
The
careers, Judge Sirica. And I think for me, that was a really powerful template, that there were a lot of things wrong that we had to come to grips with, and yet there were people doing courageous things to address it. I think all the protest movements of the 60s and 70s, I came up in that environment, and members of my family and were involved. And I think I saw the successes of it. And I think this is what's so interesting is that folks who get engaged have a lot of trouble seeing their successes and actually have an easier time seeing their defeats. But if you look at the social movements of the 60s, overwhelmingly, they won the day.
I totally agree with you. I'm so optimistic about things somehow. And I just, beyond all the cynicism of the little things that you say, you know,
Right.
some of the little
Right.
mediocrities and the quibbling and all that, it's still a very optimistic attitude, and I guess you need it if you're ever going to change.
You need it, and to me, it's not based on theory. It's based on practice. It's having seen a lot of good people get engaged and get something done, having seen a lot of good leaders, having seen a lot of bigger movements sort of overcome the odds to change society for the better. Now, it's frustrating because there are so many challenges, and the hardest ones in many cases around economic justice. But that being said, once you see the habit of humanity to band together and address problems, and you see the ability to have success, from my point of view, in the best sense of the word, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Once you realize that people can't organize and do it,
You're always looking for a way to
you're looking for a way to do it.
Right.
And if you suffer a defeat, you don't say, oh, well, the model's no good.
Right.
You say, what did we do wrong? How do we do it better next time?
And it comes down to everything. I mean, it is part of the budget. Well, what I was thinking about the other day is the people who want to cut the budget, they want smaller government to begin with. They don't believe in the role of government. People like us do believe in the role of government. And also, I think the optimism is that you really want to make the place a better place.
Well, yeah, and I want to be fair. I think there's a middle group, too. I think there's folks who ideologically do not believe in government or believe in very small government. There's folks who ideologically believe that government should play a substantial role.
Yeah.
I think there's another group that's emerging now that really is sane about and convinced about the role of government, but concerned about making the numbers work. And I come across folks who are honestly looking to make cuts, and I don't think they're coming from a mean-spirited place.
Oh no, I agree with you.
I think it's also the times we're living in. So I think for progressives at this moment, we do have to embrace the economic reality and say, okay, some things are going to change. How do we want them to change? What is our proactive vision of how government should work in a time of limit? That does not negate the role of government. That doesn't mean we are any less compassionate. It means we have to make some choices. And there is, and you know it from having been in political life, a lot of people in political life don't like to make choices and be accountable for them. So I think folks who believe in the role of government will be challenged now to have to say, well, this thing over here matters a little more than that.
So in the budget, the city budget, for instance, do you think it's a sound budget? What would you do differently?
Well, I think the first frame on this is, first the governor and the mayor. The governor, I think, is trying to correct an extraordinarily problematic situation, and I think he is the right person for the job. Obviously, I think he's the only person who probably could pull it off at this point in our history. I'm hoping that he will find a way to lessen some of the blow on New York City. I think the initial budget proposal out of Albany, very tough impact on education, healthcare. I think the revenue sharing situation needs to be made more fair in New York City. But I think the governor understands those points, and we can work with him to achieve some of that. On the city, I will always give the Mayor Bloomberg credit for having, broadly speaking, managed the budget process well. And when I was in the council, 8 years running, I worked with him and his team on budgets, and I think that a lot of what they did was quite sound. I think there's always been a set of sort of blind spots, and in this year's budget, it's the same. The threat to lay off classroom teachers, I don't understand what prioritization in the world would put classroom teachers in danger of being laid off. There are so many other things you could choose to cut before you cut classroom instruction, and it's the same guy who rightfully says, like President Obama, Our future is defined by education, and who has put immense public money into education to his credit. So something's wrong with this picture in terms of the teacher layoffs, and that has to be corrected. The same with childcare. You know, cutting childcare centers, shutting them down. We're not going to get them back. That's a huge. It's a little bit like Governor Christie and the tunnel. You know, Governor Christie's making a decision to hurt the future of our transportation infrastructure, the future of our regional economy, because he wants to save money in the short term, penny wise, pound foolish. I think the mayor is being the same way on childcare, on the services that stop child abuse, preventative services that help families in crisis. Again, you know, our singular responsibility as government is to protect people, and particularly to protect children. We actually know how to protect children. There are children we could save by intervening in their families. Again, can anyone find a priority higher than that? I can't. So I think this is where my challenge to the mayor in these coming weeks as we deal with the budget here in the city will be to rework the priorities to reflect that.
Do you think the mayor is better with systems and grand designs than he is with people's own problems and their conditions of living?
Well, absolutely. He has done some good things for this city, but not necessarily because he relates to the lives of average
It's the
New
soul
Yorkers.
that's missing, I think.
Well, I think he just doesn't perceive what day-to-day life is like for a lot of working people in the city. You've seen it in numerous situations. You saw it during the snowstorm, obviously. That doesn't mean he hasn't done some good. I think the problem is getting intensified in the third term. And you know that I thought the change in term limits was a huge mistake. I thought the mayor should have let well enough alone for his own legacy and success, but on top of that, it was an incredibly undemocratic action. But at the time, I said, a lot of people said it, the third term would be a time of disconnect, lack of responsiveness, and we're seeing it. So I think that means where he may have had some blind spots before, they're only getting intensified now.
It also accentuates to me one of my favorite things is this cross-envy between politicians and people successful in business or the private sector. Because when I grew up, all these people doing very well in the government, they never felt quite inside that they had made it until they got into the private sector. So you go into you start in the private sector and you succeed, and then what's left? You know, you got all the money you want, so you want the power of being in public service. And it shows in a way the value of a political sense, the necessity of it.
Yeah. That's right, and that's well. Look, I often like to refer to the phrase from our foundational documents about the consent of the governed.
Yeah.
and you have to believe that the people actually have some real solid common sense about what they need and why, and you want to seek their counsel and their insight. And it doesn't mean there shouldn't be some profiles and courage. It doesn't mean sometimes you don't need to push people past their biases, for example. But I do think a patrician view, a view that the people really probably don't have that much to offer, is fundamentally, it doesn't work. It's not consistent with democracy. I mean, I take the case of public school parents. I'm a public school parent. There's tremendous frustration over these last 9 years amongst public school parents that they are really not valued in the process, that their views don't matter, that they are not informed of what's happening, that even if they see something isn't working, that it doesn't have any impact on the mayor or the Department of Education. PS 114 in Canarsie is a great example of this. It's one of the schools that's being looked at for closure now. This is a school that for 5 years, parents and teachers kept alerting the Department of Education that the principal is not only ineffective, but possibly corrupt. And the DOE's, the Tweed building, the worldview was, we know better. And in fact, lo and behold, it turned out that the parents and teachers were right. The principal was removed. Unfortunately, now the DOE is suggesting they should close that school. Now, from the point of view of parents, like, wait a minute, we were the ones that saw what was happening. We're trying to notify you of the problem. You ignored the problem. Now you want to close our school. And there's a fundamental contradiction, too, because, and I say this as a parent, someone who's worked in public schools a lot in different roles in public life, we want parents and communities to engage and support and believe in their local public schools. We want them to be...
That's what we want everybody to do, right?
We want them to feel a part of it.
And then, part of their communities.
And a part of the community. And then you turn around and say, oh, by the way, we're closing it. Why shouldn't there be tremendous frustration with that You know, if there was no frustration, it would mean there was no investment, no concern. We actually want people to be invested in concern, but we've got to get in the habit of listening to parents.
And what's the point of having hearings when they know they're not going to listen? You go and rant, and that's the end of it. Do you think the Department of Education should exist, or should there be an independent Board of Education?
I believe in mayoral control. I believe in the Department of Education, but I do think there should be a city board like the PEP, the Educational Policy Panel, that should have some actual check and balance role.
And
the
be
fact that
independent.
there's not been a single vote, literally, in 8 years, where the PEP overrode the mayor's plans. Not a single one. And you remember famously, I think it was 2003, when two of the members had the audacity to disagree on the social promotion issue and were removed the same day of the vote and replaced the same day of the vote.
That's the mayor. I mean, he does that, right? It's like telling an employee and ushering him out of the building if you're not going to do what I tell you or follow the rules. Let's just go because we're going to run out of time.
Please.
The Public Advocate is a wonderful space for somebody like you.
Thank you.
Particularly because you're interested in organizing and informing the communities, right?
Right.
Let's tell us the difference. You don't have a council you have to worry about, council members.
Well, it's a different kind of job. It's a watchdog role. You know, I'm supposed to provide a check and balance on the mayor and the city agencies. Obviously, it's the ombudsman role too. So we're there to hear what any New Yorker is experiencing and facing, particularly if it has to do with the city government, but it could be with a business, it could be with another level of government. We're there to help. And bluntly, and you know it so well, we've all seen it, a lot of bureaucracies do not say to the constituent, we're here to help. In fact, they treat the constituent as part of the problem or as having a view that couldn't possibly be right. We take the opposite view. If someone's having a problem, we're assuming they're probably got a lot of legitimacy to their problem. We want to do something about it. You add all that together, it's a perfect venue to then listen to what communities are going through, identify problems and solutions, and go out and organize people to make change. So we're working with public school parents, like the parents at PS 114 in Brooklyn, to try and stop that closure because it doesn't make sense. We're working with tenants in buildings that literally their landlords aren't giving them heat and hot water. And we've started our landlord watch list to identify where the landlords are openly breaking the law and getting away with it. What can we do? And one of the solutions is organize tenants and work with them to keep pressure on landlords for change. So I think there's the beauty of this particular office is a public advocate's office is actually supposed to respond to the people and help the people to get their voice heard at City Hall and get a real change.
But it comes back to you too, doesn't it? Because the complaints form patterns.
Yes.
And then you see what the deficiencies are in the government that's responding to them.
That's exactly right.
And that goes back to our optimism and wanting to change the world, right?
It does. And to see well, I get a little crazy in the best sense of the word when I hear of a bureaucracy not serving someone. You know, when I hear of someone who's trying to just do the right thing and get what they deserve and they can't get it. And my job is to help that person solve the problem. And that's a very gratifying type of work.
By the same token, we do have respect for people who work in the government.
Of course. Look,
frequently it's not their fault that this bureaucratic maze is around them.
A lot of times the first person will tell you what's wrong and how to fix it is the off-record government employee.
Right,
Who say, don't quote me, but this is what's wrong and this is what we should do. No, the bureaucracies have a life of their own, and it's something we fight all the time. And there are illogical laws and outdated laws. There's all sorts of, and there's battles between agencies. There's all sorts of barriers. The people who do the work, by and large, are good people. So I'm not trying to say for a moment if you work in a government bureaucracy, you are therefore bureaucratic in your mindset. You very well could be the most responsive person in the world. I do think there's a culture problem in pretty much all levels of government and large institutions in general, where there's lack of responsiveness. People fall in the habit of believing they know better.
Right.
And it's my job to remind people, again, there's a lot of wisdom at the grassroots.
What about the unions and public employees and the spread to other unions and the whole crackdown? Unions are a very valuable thing, aren't they, for workers?
Well, they're not just for workers, for society
people,
as a whole.
right.
I mean, remember...
And they're under assault.
Yeah, it's...
Across the board.
They're across the board, and it's wrong, because if you want to go back to the world before we had unions, which a century ago, unions were much less common. And we had immense social injustice, and people were paid, in many cases, horrible wages and unsafe conditions. All of the movement in our society towards labor occurred as a result of life as it was lived.
Right.
People were treated badly. There was massive unfairness before people's eyes, and they realized the only way they could solve it was banding together. Plus, unions have played an immensely powerful role in a lot of the social change movements that we now regard as fundamental to our democracy, civil rights movement being a great example. So they have a positive role to play in our society. Collective bargaining rights have to be protected. Unions as a way of making sure people are paid well and have good workplace conditions. All those are really fundamental, and what's happening in Wisconsin is a pure assault on those basics. That doesn't mean every union is perfect. It doesn't mean all the work rules are perfect. It doesn't mean some things can't be changed. In fact, we're all going to have to figure out a humane and decent solution when it comes to things like pension reform. But labor needs to be at the table because labor actually understands what people need amongst their workforce and are willing to have a legitimate conversation. I think, again, one of the huge mistakes the mayor is making is to talk about pension reform without bringing the people who are affected to the table and treating them as folks you can actually work with towards a solution.
It's the unions play the same role as an organized community.
Correct.
I mean, to make a democracy work, you have to have basically almost equal partners, right? It's the populace and the people who are responding to them. I mean, so we see it in all different places.
You need legitimate interests
to
together at the
protect their own
table.
interests, right.
The business community will always be organized, as it should be. You want communities to be organized. You want workers to be organized. And it doesn't have to mean armed camps. It actually can be the basis for finding a solution. 1975, which is put on a pedestal now as this moment in history where business and labor and government got together, wasn't quite as beautiful and pretty as it's often described, but it worked. And people did come to the table to a common purpose. And in fact, it was because they did represent important sectors in society. I think we've lost that habit a bit, and we would be better served to bring the different interests to the table, assuming in the end, you know what, they're all smart, they're all ultimately civically minded, they're all looking for what would be a reasonable outcome.
And everybody does need to adjust and change.
Right.
So, we do that.
The
Hopefully
nature of the world.
that says you grow up, you get a little wiser, right? As you get older, you
We
get
like
a
to
little
believe.
wiser.
We
Yeah,
like
we
to
do.
believe.
We try. I want to go back to your background. You grew up in Cambridge, you went to school there.
I went to school there,
college here.
came to NYU to go to college, went to Columbia for graduate school, and a few years later got a phone call from a dear friend, Herbert Block. You may have met him along the
Oh,
way.
I remember him.
And he said,
I remember him when he was a little boy,
When
and
he was
his
a young
father
guy.
brought him to my office.
There you go. And he said, would you like to come join the David
How did you meet
Dinkins
him?
mayoral campaign? I met him on another campaign, on the Mondale Ferraro campaign. And he said, would you like to come work for
So you were
David
a young
Dinkins?
kid who volunteered in campaigns.
I actually was a young, right out of college, originally with Mondale Ferraro, and then with Dinkins working on campaigns.
Yeah.
And got involved in 1989, and here I am. Everything, I had an extraordinary experience, 4 years working at City Hall for Mayor Dinkins. Very tough years, very tough time, but met all of my best friends in the process, and met my wife, most importantly. And, to me, that was the ultimate formative experience.
That's a great experience. How many children do you have?
We have two children,
children.
Dante, who's 13, and Kiara, who's 16.
And they're both in public school.
They're both in public school. They're
And you
both
live in
doing
Brooklyn?
great. I live in Brooklyn and Park Slope. The kids are doing great. And teenagers help keep you both up to date and on your toes. And I know my authority is not absolute at any time because my teenagers never allow it to be.
So they keep you humble.
Yes.
But so you've had all this experience. You've had from the campaign organizing.
Yep.
You've had from the City Hall, the carrying out and the policy planning.
Yep.
And then you were in the City Council, so it was legislative. And now you've put it all together.
Yeah.
And you're going to organize the city.
Well, and there's pieces of all of that in this job because you need to, what I learned in City Hall and I also learned at HUD working for Andrew Cuomo is how the executive branch works. I learned in the council, obviously, how to use the legislative process to best effect. And then all the campaign work and work with issue groups, the organizing, all of that is necessary to make things better. And all of that comes together in this office because we have to, push the executive agencies in the right direction. We're using a lot of different approaches. We have the opportunity to legislate. Right now I'm working on a piece of legislation I'm very excited about called the HEAT Act, which is I'm the lead sponsor, which would increase penalties for landlords who don't provide heat and hot water in the cold months to their tenants.
Can you introduce a bill directly into the
can.
council? You
Yes,
can, yes.
I can. I'm on the pension board. I'm on the city planning commission. I have an appointee on the city planning commission. So there's a lot of different tools, and all of the things that I've had the opportunity to do before contribute to it. Right. But this is a role where you have to listen to what people are experiencing and then come up with a creative solution and then be very, very persistent in pursuing it.
And it's a very ideal position to be in, it seems to me.
It's a tremendous opportunity to get something done. I mean, that's the exciting part about it, is that each day you wake up and know you can have an impact.
So you have a website and people can
www. .advocate.nyc.gov.
And if people don't take advantage, it's their fault, right?
Well, they'll be missing a lot.
Obviously. So are you going to go back into electoral politics?
Well, I am in electoral
I
politics.
mean, go back to organizing and doing all that kind of stuff?
You know, right now, this is an extraordinary opportunity to get something done here and now, and
So
we'll see
you really helped elect a United States Senator from here. Did you help elect the governor also?
Well, not so much this time. I helped out in any way I could, and I also was involved in his 2002 campaign.
Yeah.
But I'm very proud of the work I did for Andrew Cuomo at HUD, because I think his reputation that he built as HUD secretary and assistant secretary really were crucial to what he's done now.
Right, it is. So let's be optimistic about the future.
Yes.
We think that Obama's going to be reelected.
I don't think it'll be easy, but I believe he will win.
Yeah.
I
Do you
think we need
think
to be
he's going to
vigilant.
be able to regain the kind of excitement and hope that we had?
It'll be different. I think that, as you said earlier, I think there was a tremendous sense in this country that we were responding to a problem in our history, and that Barack Obama, for so many reasons, was a huge step forward for this country. And he also provided a vision that was really powerful for the moment we're in, including the notion of not letting partisanship get out of hand, and talked about, well in the campaign, even more so, I think, in his recent State of the Union, the kind of evolution we have to go through. So our country's in a different place now, where we have to go. I think what will happen going forward is the excitement of taking on that mission. I think it's different than the achievement of electing him. And I think the last few years, the economic crisis and all, have made it harder to have the kind of hope maybe we had when we elected him. But as we actually compete in the world, as we see ourselves able to change and evolve, a different kind of excitement will ensue. As we do, as we create more alternative energy, and as we improve our education system, that's going to bring up a different kind of excitement. It might even mirror some of what Kennedy talked about in the 60s that did energize a new generation of people. And it wasn't just a theory, it was about actually coming together to improve the country. I think he can do that.
That's a wonderful way to end our conversation.
There you go.
So thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And continue with this optimism and direction in the way you're doing things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.